afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Keith Silva. The flooding this past summer damaged farm fields from Calais to Chester. Flooding literally brings with it more than water. Often the chemicals, compounds, and contamination found in floodwaters can be more harmful than the water itself. To learn more about the impact of what was left behind on the farm fields, I'm joined by Chris Callahan. He's an Extension Associate Professor of Agricultural Engineering at the University of Vermont and leads University of Vermont Extension's Ag Engineering team. Chris, thanks for coming in and talking to us about this.
Good to be with you, Keith.
So we talked about that you led this effort to sample and test. What did you learn?
So the first thing we learned is that the impact of the flooding relative to this specific concern, potential soil contamination, is very, very localized. Even farms a couple of miles away from each other on the same river, for example, we saw some pretty different results. The other thing we learned is that there were some unexpected results. We were looking for certain things, which we'll get into, and expecting to see them mainly in flooded areas, and found them in non-flooded areas, but not in flooded areas right next to each other. The other most important thing I think we learned was how to be better prepared to respond to these events in this way with sampling and analysis in the future.
Localized, I mean, depending on the contour of the land, can be more flooded in one area and less in another. Were you seeing those kind of changes as well?
What we did, because whenever you go and do sampling, you need to balance number of samples with time and effort and cost. And so we tended to do what we call aggregate sampling in relatively large swaths of fields, really trying to get us a holistic sense for the differences.
Gotcha. What about, there were a lot of crops in the ground, of course, saw lots of pictures of crops covered in mud. What happened to those crops?
Right, so the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is very clear about when floodwater contacts food meant to be consumed, it's adulterated when floodwater contacts that. So I will say that certainly in this incident, there has been incredibly good compliance with that. Nobody wants to sell food that's going to cause problems for people. And so that anything that was contacted directly by floodwater cannot be sold and should not be consumed. And that's been taken care of.
Do those just get plowed under? They don't get harvested and put in a box or a room, right?
Right. By and large, those areas are just plowed under, which we found is also another thing that helps dry the soil out. And we can get into that a little bit as well. It's one of the things we found is moisture in the soil. It turns out supports microbiological communities.
Who knew?
Yeah. So trying to get things dry is important for replanting opportunities.
Just turning that soil over and getting the wet stuff on top dries it out.
Yeah.
So if they plowed their crops under it, got rid of those adulterated crops, the word you used. What about the crops that got planted? Is that a little bit more complicated? Is that just, I mean, I imagine it differs from crop to crop.
Yeah, very different crop to crop. It's also an area of very active research, understanding how a particular plant with a harvestable and edible portion that goes to us, how that does or does not take in things from the soil around it that might be contaminants. So it's called internalization. That varies crop to crop. It also turns out can vary environment to environment. And so there's a lot of nuance to that. That's not something we got into closely with this work. Our main interest was understanding what's the soil condition in terms of contamination to support immediate decision making about replanting, but also to understand long-term, how can we do this better and inform better decisions?
Let's get into some of the things that you learned. How do you know how long the contaminants stay? Is there a way to sort of test for that, or is the soil changed forever? Is it no good anymore? What's the issue?
Well, I think as other examples have shown in Vermont and in the region, frankly throughout the country, there are things that last a lot longer than other things, and that's not
in the soil.
And that's not that wasn't the specific focus of this work. We were looking at things like generic E. coli, even fuel residue that may remain in the soil, and so those things are quite they change pretty dramatically, just naturally, even without flooding happening.
Right.
So none of those things tend to last very long. And part of this testing was to understand just how long do they last in specific areas, and how do those areas differ.
Was that one of the things that surprised you? What you found and thought would last, or?
It did surprise me a bit. Others who are more knowledgeable in microbiology were not as surprised, and that's part of the beauty of doing this work as a multidisciplinary team. But yeah, it is quite dynamic, and so what we found was results at 30 days from the flooding. Varied pretty significantly from 60 days. And that said, we intend to continue testing for up to 120 days, partly to understand, was what we're seeing really the result of flooding? Or is there a natural underlying ebb and flow to these populations?
It doesn't always flood, but it does rain, and there is runoff, and those, as you were saying, gasoline, oil, those sort of things that run off from the roads, or any other contaminants get into the soil one way or the other. How did you choose the farms where the soil was sampled?
Yeah, the nice thing about being engaged in the community, and especially in the farming community, is when these things happen, oftentimes we're on the phone with people right away. And so this work was from the start very participatory. And so as I found, the longer I do this work, the more I find I'm led by the people I'm here to help and work with. And so it was being asked for. And so what we did then was say, what can we do? What kind of work can we do that's supportive? What can we learn from this? And the main criteria for selecting farms was growers of produce who had both flooded and non-flooded areas. We wanted to be able to do the comparison. Around the state, different watersheds, different flooding sources and impacts. Other than that, it was a matter of who can we get to get out and do the sampling and, and handle the logistics.
Right, because there was a whole team. It wasn't just Chris Callahan.
Absolutely.
Some sampling.
Yeah.
NECAFS is an organization that's associated with the University of Vermont Extension. What is NECAFS, and how are they connected to the rest of the United States?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. So the NECAFS is the Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety. We're one of 4 regional centers established jointly by the FDA and the USDA.
Okay.
I happen to lead the Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety. And what this organization does is focus on education and outreach to enhance food safety. The impact on this specific project is oftentimes when things like this happen, we can feel isolated. It's happened to us, it's happened here.
Right.
And what a center like NECAFS does is help us stay connected to others who have been through the same thing across the nation. So as we were developing our sampling plan and our analysis plan, I'm talking with colleagues from California, from Florida, places that have experienced this before, and understanding what they've learned. And now, based upon what we've learned, we can help support them as well. So we're learning together across the country, even when things are happening locally.
The majority of your work does concern food safety. You've brought it up several times. Is there any consumer concern here? Is there any issue where, you already talked about, if it's touched floodwaters, it's no good, but a lot of your work is in long-term storage and things like that. Any concerns whatsoever? We don't want to scare people, but we also want to make sure folks are informed.
Yeah, no, I think follow good kitchen practices, wash your own hands at home, keep meats and vegetables separate, especially if you're going to be eating vegetables raw and not cooked. Those are the key things consumers should be thinking about and be concerned with. The food system in our country is incredibly safe, and the food system in Vermont is especially safe, in my opinion. And I get to see it up close and personal.
That's right, yes.
But we've got people who really want what they're growing. They want to be healthy and nutritious, and they are truly committed to that.
Right. No farmer's going to purposely sell something that's bad. They're not trying to ruin their entire business. The data that you collect, how will this be compiled? How will the information get out to growers? And how is it going to mitigate future flooding? Yeah,
so this project started with a pretty simple idea and grew pretty quickly. The first thing is the data, the most important and near-term data is the testing results for the farm going to the farm to make an immediate decision within 30 days of an event, and then 60 days, et cetera. So that's one group of data. The other group of data is more broad than that and deeper. And so the same samples we did for this quick analysis and to support decision making is also being used to help build a larger database of understanding. So that includes partners at UVM research labs. It includes partners at the FDA in Laurel, Maryland, who are also looking at the genomic background of the different organisms that are in the soil. I think the other thing that the other data or lessons learned here are what we've learned as an organization and among our partners in terms of how to respond to an incident like this. And my hope is to develop a set of guidelines or a guide that help not only us next time, but others who might experience this who haven't before.
Because this is really what's important, is this is going to happen again. Let's be prepared, and let's, as you say, have a guideline or a book that sort of says, here's the things to follow, here's what you're looking for, because it's going to happen again. Might not be in the same places, or it might.
Yeah, and it's not just the guide, but organizationally, and together with partners, how can we all be better prepared? Not just what the guide is, but how do we work together to do this better next time?
Right. You said the sampling was immediate, and then 60 and 120 days. How far out are you going to go?
I wish I could say it was immediate. It was 30 days.
30 days after the event.
Yes,
okay.
And then every 30 days after that. We're planning to go to 120 days, and that's going to be surprising to some people because it's probably going to be snow-covered fields and whatnot. But we're going to do our best. Again, we're trying to understand what's the long-term impact of what we're seeing and what's the natural occurrence of some of the contaminants we're looking for.
Because a lot of these contaminants, regardless whether they're organic, inorganic, or whatever, they have half-lives, they have full lives, and there still might be something that came from floodwaters that could be there in 120 days that at least the farmer should know about.
For sure. The other side of that is the non-flooded areas. And getting a sense for what's the natural occurrence and presence and fate of potential contaminants in those areas relative to what we saw after the flood.
Gotcha.
So.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. Very interesting, very important for food safety, for consumers, and for farmers. And a thanks goes out to everyone here at WCAX for making today's program possible. And I want to remind you that if you missed any portion of our conversation with Chris today, you can watch it again on YouTube or Facebook by searching Across the Fence. Take care.